Now, this link between religion and morality that really is everywhere in our culture, and which really underwrites religious moderation and religious fundamentalism to a significant degree. This idea that without religion, something fundamental would be lost to us in moral terms. This really is questionable when you look at the books. The truth is that not even, just to speak specifically of the Bible for a moment, not even an Orthodox Jew or a fundamentalist Christian can take God at his word, given how sadistic God is in books like Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Exodus. I mean, if you were going to draw your to-do list out of a book like Leviticus, you would make Mullah Omar of the Taliban look like Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I mean, it's just, it paints a vision of life so needlessly horrible, so subversive of the basic project of creating a sustainable society where human happiness is even possible, that we effectively have edited the Bible. Even fundamentalists have. But it's important to point out that nobody ever says these passages are immoral. I mean, the idea that you find that a woman is not a virgin on her wedding night and you stone her to death. You stone homosexuals to death. If your kids talk back to you, you stone them to death. If you go into a town and you see someone praying to a foreign god, you kill him, you kill his family, you kill everyone in the town. Okay, these are not metaphors. These are not analogies for some spiritual struggle within. These are explicit directives to kill people for theological crimes. No one ever says this is immoral. Christians just say we don't have to do this anymore because Jesus brought us the doctrine of grace. Well, incidentally, Jesus also said that every jot and every tittle of the law has to be fulfilled. So the inquisitors of the Middle Ages had a rationale for practicing this kind of law. And I can assure you that St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas had read the Sermon on the Mount. They managed to square the ministry of Jesus with their impulses to kill people for thought crimes. I mean, if this is the best book we have, from the point of view of fundamentalism, the Bible is the best book we have, or the Quran is the best book we have because it's literally been dictated by the creator of the universe. From the point of view of moderation, these are the best books we have, but who knows what their source is. Just the smartest people who ever lived wrote these books, say. If the Bible is the best book we have in the West, in ethical terms, we should be practicing slavery. The creator of the universe clearly expects us to keep slaves. He simply tells us not to beat our slaves so severely that we put out their eyes or their teeth. Jesus clearly expected us to keep slaves. He never criticizes the institution of slavery. He uses analogies with slaves. Paul in 1 Timothy admonishes slaves to serve their masters well and to serve their Christian masters especially well so that they can partake in their holiness. The abolitionists were absolutely on the wrong side of the theological debate. If this is the wisest book we have, the slaveholders of the South were right. And on so many other questions this is true. If this is the wisest book we have, we should be beating our children with rods. It says in Proverbs. Incidentally, fundamentalist Christians in our country are beating their children with rods. Last year alone in Alabama, 40,000 kids were paddled in their schools. It's legal to do this. This is a faith-based initiative. It's important for us to recognize that we decide what is good in the good book. We cherry-pick these books based on our own ethical intuitions. All we have to decide questions of ethics are our own ethical intuitions and the ethical intuitions of others who we are in conversation with. You can put your faith in a 21st century conversation about ethics, or you can put your faith in a first century conversation as preserved in these books.
Well, violence, there's no mystery about violence. I mean, violence arises because we are primates, imperfectly evolved. Our prefrontal lobes are too small, our adrenaline glands are too big. There are various other deformities of this kind. Sexual organs designed by a committee, all the rest of it. And we're greedy, and
we're back to polytheism,
we're greedy and fearful, and covetous of other people's and also, surprisingly, it's probably our biggest defect, given that the reason we're so successful is there's almost no genetic difference between us. If we were dogs, we'd all be the same. Breed, fantastically little variation. But we're incredibly prone to tribalism and ethnic and racial, what Freud calls the narcissism of small differences. So, of course, if a tribe, let's say, that's calling itself the Children of Israel, for the sake of argument, decides that it should kill all the other tribes that get in its way, take their women as slaves, butcher their men, take their land, take their cattle, and so battle in this way across to Canaan and take everyone else's land and burn down their... That's going to happen whether there's a God or not, or whether there's religion or not, but it'll happen very much more intensely if they believe they have a mandate from heaven to do so. It's a terrific force multiplier. I think there would have been a quarrel between the Hutu and the Tutsi of Rwanda, say, once Belgian colonialism had established that there were these two different character groups, types, that is, the tribes. But it's a terrific force multiplier that the Catholic Church was as strong as it was in Rwanda, the most Christian country in Africa, made it infinitely worse. What makes the Israel-Palestine two-state solution ungettable? Because there's a chunk of people on both sides who say they have God in their corner and God gave only their group the land. And they can negate the votes of everybody else, including the whole of the international community, by the way, just because of their faith. Northern Ireland is the same. There would have been a Republican nationalist dispute. It's infinitely worse because of religion. So I think the corollary I'd like to hold would be that the less religion there was, the less violence there would be. But I can't in good Darwinian conscience say that. But I think the more that people refused orders that were divine, as, for example, to take the preposterous allegation that the rabbi makes that the wars of the 20th century were secular wars, the belt buckle worn by every soldier in the Nazi army that says, Gott mit uns, God on our side. I don't think that was a help to you. Things were bad enough as they were. On page 70, I think it is, of Mein Kampf, Hitler says that in taking on the filthy virus of Judaism, I know I'm doing the work of the Lord, and I'm summoned by the Lord to do this work. A book, one of the very few books the Vatican didn't ban in that period, by the way. I don't think that was a help either. So I'd say, on the whole, we'd be better off without the belief either in a supreme dictator, because that leads to violence, or the idea that God takes sides in our pathetic mammalian disputes.
I want to just, as a coda to this, when you say that we shouldn't take orders, I just want to remind you of a long history. For example, the abolition of slavery was almost entirely the work of people who believed they were taking orders from something higher than societal orders. Wilberforce in England, here, Beecher and John Brown and so on, they believed they were doing God's work by abolishing slavery. And it's interesting that the abolition of slavery was a Christian movement, but the idea is it's not an issue of who you take orders from. It's an issue of the orders you take. That's the issue. And it comes down in part to what kind of religion you practice, not whether you practice religion.
Comrades, I'm sorry.
Comrades, what kind of orders you take.
Brothers and sisters. Brothers and sisters.
That's better.
Comrades, friends. I suppose it is somewhat to the credit of some Christians that in the waning decades of thousands of years of slavery that were biblically mandated, some of them belatedly joined things like the American Anti-Slavery Society, stars of which were Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, non-believers, right? Whereas to the last day of the Confederacy, the flag of the Confederacy said Deo Vindice, God on our side. And every justification for that slavery came from the Bible, where indeed it's not hard to find it.
We're going to take questions from the audience in about 1 minute.
How can we publicly challenge the more dangerous tenets of Islam without further inspiring bigotry against Muslims? Now, you and I have both, unlike many scientists, we've sounded off on this. It's been, for as long as I've been an atheist, it's been deeply unfashionable amongst atheists, even atheists who think it's a legitimate project to criticize religion, it's been unfashionable to criticize any one religion more than any other.
Yes.
And I noticed,
especially one any more than any.
Yes. You can go to town on Mormonism or Scientology, but it's
or Christianity, actually. I mean,
yeah. Well, but the default assumption is that if you're against religion, or if you think that the evidentiary claims upon which all these revealed religions are founded are unjustifiable, well then they're all on all fours together, and you don't really need to weight your concern. But it just has seemed obvious, at least since September 11th, 2001, that one of these religions is producing more than its fair share of conflict and oppression. So back to the question, how do you, given that you and I both think it's legitimate to focus on the most harmful instances of religion as we see it, how do you avoid energizing those voices who are actually animated by bigotry and xenophobia?
Yes. Well, I think we both have this problem. I suppose. I I listened to one of your podcasts about Islam and arguing against the point of view which says that the terrorists which we all know about in the Middle East are not motivated by religion. That they're motivated by anything but religion. There's a kind of desperate desire to blame anything but religion for what is going on.
This was the podcast where that issue of ISIS's magazine, Dabiq, where they just spelled out that they were as fed up with this as I was, and they just wrote all of their reasons for killing infidels. It was amazing. I felt like I was in a lucid dream.
It's true. I do listen to it. What's it called, Sam?
I forgot what it's called, but you'll find it. It's sometime in the last 10 podcasts.
No, I think what. Sorry.
Oh.
Right. Sorry. What jihadists really think, and it's why we hate you and why we fight you.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely. I mean, Sam could have written the script. It's just completely. We hate you because you're not Muslim. Yeah. It amounts to nothing more than that.
Yeah.
And we fight you for the same reason.
But what do you do? Actually, I had a podcast that I just released today where I was interviewing our mutual friend Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and I asked her a related question. Yeah, thank you. This is the true feminist hero who was just declared an anti-Muslim extremist by the Southern Poverty Law Center. That's absolutely unbelievable. But so I asked her,
and has been disinvited by at least several campuses in this country, including Brandeis.
So I asked her, get more to the point of conspiracy thinking on the right. So it's often, it's simply a fact that Islamists and jihadists are scheming to spread their views, and both by the sword and otherwise, throughout open societies, and they're using the norms and institutions of our open societies against ourselves, and in a very cynical and calculated way. And it's not even a conspiracy, as Ayaan pointed out. It's just there in the open. This is an agenda that Islamists have.
They're totally open about it, totally honest about it.
Yeah, but the issue is you can take this, one's concern about this in truly paranoid direction. So I hear from people who think Ayaan is a stealth Islamist or jihadist. I hear from people who think that Majid, who I wrote Islam and the Future of Tolerance with, is a stealth Islamist and jihadist. And so there's no obvious signage on the way to complete insanity that where you're told that you are now too fearful and too concerned about things that actually are contiguous with real reasons for concern. But I asked Ayaan, So where's the boundary here? How do we differentiate a reasonable fear about genuinely scheming people and right-wing paranoia in this case? And she just said, facts. Just one word. It's like you're either talking about facts or you're not. And when you're talking about facts, you can't go wrong in this space. And I thought that was a great answer.
I think one point to make is that the main victims of these awful people are actually Muslims themselves.
Yeah.
But what about the attack from the left, which in liberal left circles in America and Britain, where Islam gets a free pass on all sorts of terrible things like misogyny, which no liberal would actually sanction, and yet if a Muslim behaves in horrifically misogynistic ways, somehow that's ignored, as though that's somehow legitimate. Oh, it's part of their culture, so they're allowed to do that. I must say, I despise that kind of thing.
Well, there was I think it was an anthropologist whose quote this I'm about to butcher, but it's a great point. He said, when one person grabs a little girl and cuts off her clitoris with a septic blade, he is a dangerous lunatic. When 1 million people do this, it's a culture, and we need to respect it. And that's the little crystal of moral confusion that's just at the center of the liberal worldview that we need to fully crush.
I dare to suggest that there's too much respect in the world.
Christopher.
It's pathetic, I'm sorry to say, to say of the cosmological and the genetic that these are deterministic processes. They're not at all. They're full of extraordinary randomness, and in the genetic case of mutation. Stephen Jay Gould, the great paleontologist, wrote a book which I recommend to you called The Burgess Shale, which is it's the side of a mountain in Canada, in the Canadian Rockies, that's sheared off. So you can see the inside of a mountain. You can see it as if you're looking at a blackboard, and you can see the growth and development of species, and you realize that it's not a tree, it's more like a bush. There are reverse branches that go off and don't go nowhere, and the others that succeed. And different kinds of failure and different kinds of mutation. His most exciting thought, most revolutionary thought, is this. If you could, so to speak, put all that onto a tape and rewind it, and then press play again, there's no certainty it would come out the same way. In fact, there's every reason to believe that it would not. So there's nothing predetermined, there's nothing deterministic about this at all. And thanks to your understanding of our genetics, which are also not predetermined because they're a result of random mutation and natural selection, as everyone now knows, and that's why we can have, sad to say for the kosher, but we can have skin transplants and organ transplants from pigs who are much closer to us than we used to think. We can also sequence the DNA of viruses and learn how to immunize ourselves from them. It works, in other words. But yes, it can be tampered with, it can be engineered, for good as well as for ill. There's nothing deterministic about it at all. It's much more exciting, it's much more interesting, it's much more rewarding, it's verifiable, and yes, there are elements of, I was trying to say, the miraculous, the awe-inspiring, the tragic, the majestic in this, that there simply are not in the incantations of Genesis, where the supposed authors claim to know the divinity, the creator, on personal terms. This is nonsense, it's for children.
Rabbi?
First of all, it is interesting. I mean, Stephen Gould, who was, by the way, very sympathetic to religion and wrote a book called Rocks of Ages, which I also recommend to you, where he said that religion and science don't overlap.
They sure do.
But wait 1 second. If you read his book on the Burgess Shale, he does say if you rewind, then you assume if you push play again, you would get a different result. And that's certainly true unless the result was intended. But more important than that, yes, there's randomness in the system. Nobody would argue that there isn't randomness in the system. But randomness isn't free will. Randomness is getting a result you don't expect. The question is, how do you get a directed choice, which isn't random? I choose right now to pick this glass up. Now, how did I make that choice? If I'm purely a product of my DNA and my environment, then it's not a choice. then it was programmed in, then it's instinct. And the whole point that religions always made about instinct was that human beings can rise above it. Unlike animals, which are the same at age 2 as they are at age 10, as they are at age 15, a human being grows and changes and chooses. That's the basis of religious
I have to say, to me, it doesn't seem a matter of religion that I can choose to pick up this class. That seems to me to be well within what could develop purely scientific basis.
How?
I'm not a scientist, but it doesn't seem like a mystery of God to me personally.
Oh, sure it is. Well, no, but seriously, where does the element of free choice come from?
I could be purely instinctual and put my head in a stream and drink and choose to do that.
But wait, one second. When you say choose, when you say choose, where does the choice come from any more than the choice of this glass to fall down? Where do you get a choice as opposed to a complex interaction of DNA and environment, neither of which you chose?
Again, piling on completely unnecessary assumptions. It's also inviting a question that will make you uncomfortable.
Go ahead.
If you say that no, it's because God has given you free will, I have to ask you, how do you know that?
Well, are you assuming that we have free will? Are you assuming that we have free will?
Then
give me another source.
If you answer my question with another
question,
me another I'll still answer it.
Okay.
I will still answer it, even though your question is an answer to mine. Rather, not an answer, a response to mine.
Yeah.
The view I take about free will is that, of course, we have free will because we have no choice but to have it. I was, and to some extent, I still to some extent am a dialectical materialist, and I also think there are some ironies in the universe as well as in history. But to say, of course we have free will, the boss says we've got it, is to make a mockery of the whole concept. And it's also to invite the question, what kind of tyranny is this that you want? You want an all-supervising, all-deciding person. I ask you first, what sources of information do you have about this person's existence that I don't have, that are denied to me? I'd like to know. And second, why do you want it? Why do you want to arrive at a terminus of unfreedom where there is a celestial authority upon whom all things depend and from which all things flow? Why do you want that, and how on earth do you know that there's any case to be made for its existence?
Yes, please. That's a good question.
I don't think that's a terminus of unfreedom.
I think you're only free when you've declared against it, frankly. That's the beginning of freedom, is the emancipation from the tyranny of theocracy, yes.
I actually think that the whole point that I was making was that a belief in a God who creates you is what gives you free will, and that without it, you have to fall into a determinism. And by the way, you may think that science gives it to you, but every scientist I've asked on this question, including David Barash, who's an evolutionary biologist, says that and Steven Pinker had the same reaction, is that it is more or less a commonplace of modern science, that determinism is the only worldview that's consistent with an understanding of the way science works. So you may be able to find it in science, but I haven't met a scientist yet who's been able to account for it.
Not every scientist is a believer.
Putting that aside. No, of course not. I'm saying that those who don't use determinism as their philosophical assumption, but let me answer his question too, which is, therefore, I assume that as a religious person, you're granted freedom. That's the whole point, is you do make choices.
Once you've said granted.
Better choices.
Once you've said granted, you've made my point.
And his English, he knows about kings.
You're granted.
Thank you for making me free.
You're granted freedom. So you're granted freedom by the evolutionary process. I'm granted freedom by a creator. Either way,
I'm not granted all sorts of freedom. I mean, of course scientists are right to this extent. Einstein says the miraculous thing about the laws of nature is they're never suspended. That's what's so amazing about them. They're immutable. Religion claims that on occasions the laws of nature are suspended in order to prove what they wouldn't otherwise prove.
It depends who you ask, not Maimonides. It depends who you ask in religion.
Is there a fundamental contradiction in your mind, Rabbi, between Jewish teaching and evolution?
No.
None at all?
Not. No. None.
But evolution, as we learn it, doesn't require a deity.
No. It depends what you mean by require a deity. It's just like saying that building the stage doesn't require a deity. The question isn't whether the discovery of the mechanism by which God made the world requires God. It just requires the discovery of the mechanism by which God made the world. But it also doesn't outlaw God or make God impossible or make it, in fact, less plausible.
What's the difference, to your mind, between mystery and incomprehension?
Incomprehension.
In other words,
incomprehension describes my reaction to the question.
Oh, great. America's rabbi thinks my question's incomprehensible.
I'm not sure I understand. Tell me again.
Well, science has progressively made a lot of things comprehensible.
Yes. Mystery means those things that by the very nature of the world are unfigure-outable no matter how bright we are, no matter how hard we work at it.
How do you know that they're unfigure-outable?
Well, you're asking...
Prefer that over incomprehensible.
You're asking no in a way that I'm not willing to concede is the proper way to describe religious conviction.
Christopher, what about you? If it's not God, is it all soluble?
Well, first,
one day?
You're right that science has made many things more comprehensible to us, and it's explained things that religion used to take credit for. In other words, now we know there's a germ theory of disease. Diseases are not curses or revenges from heaven. Same with earthquakes and so on. The stuff they used to teach us, and many of them still do, is nonsense. Evil nonsense as well as ignorant nonsense. But it's also taught us, just in my lifetime, an enormous amount more about how little we know. We're much, much more ignorant than people who lived before Galileo. Because we have now an increasingly large idea of the fantastic expanse of the unknown. That's precisely the moment at which to say that skepticism is what's necessary, inquiry, debate, doubt. Where's faith in this? Where's the usefulness of faith there? There's no use to it at all. Socrates, who, as far as I know, existed but may well not have done, it doesn't matter to me. No one will insult me if they say, Socrates, your great hero, didn't exist. Try it on a Muslim, try it on a Christian, their prophets didn't exist. Or tell people that Moses is a myth. They start hurling themselves about, making menacing noises very often. Socrates said, you're only educated when you've understood how ignorant you are. And you're only going to even find that out by doubting everything all the time. There's all the difference in the world between that outlook and that mentality, and the mentality of faith. And second, on metaphysics, which I noticed take refuge in several times already this evening, like what is love? Is something poetic or is it prosaic? Very good questions, but metaphysical ones. Those who say God exists and intervenes in the world, in other words, those who say there is a religious God, the God of religion, are saying that redemption is on offer to human beings, that salvation is on offer to them, and that if they reject the offer, they can be in really big trouble. Now, don't start talking to an audience like this, or, if you don't mind, to a debate partner like me, as if religion was a private matter, because everybody knows that if it was, there wouldn't be anything to argue about. It's precisely because it claims to be a total solution, a complete solution to all problems, available on pain of death, sometimes, in some forms, but available to you if you'll only have enough faith. Where we've just found out that faith is probably the most overrated of the virtues and the one least useful to us in the real dilemmas that we actually have to face.
This is a very common question. It's a question for which I'm sure we don't have a totally satisfying answer, but this is, if anything, this is the center of the bullseye with respect to the life horizon of atheism and the future of religion. How do atheists find meaning in life? Can there be a sense of the sacred in a truly rational context? How does anything matter if there's no heaven to go to? That final line is, so the first two sentences seem really kind of level-headed. But to the religious mind, this final question is just as pressing as the first two. And this is where my intuitions sort of fail. I've never understood this idea that without eternity, nothing matters. It seems to me you could just as well run it the other way. If in light of eternity, certainly whatever happens here doesn't matter. I mean, we have an eternity to make up for this catastrophe, right? So, if anything, each moment of life becomes more precious given the fact that there's no promise of eternity.
The trouble of being on stage with Sam is I agree with everything he says, and so I mean, I completely agree with that. The idea that anybody could think that there is no point in life if there's no eternity to go to. What a pathetically inadequate person that must be. You have to make your own meaning in life, and we do that. I mean, we love each other. We listen to music or write music. We do science. We are spellbound by the beauty of nature, by the beauty of the universe, by the beauty of the Grand Canyon where I've just been. This gives you meaning in life. Meaning in life, the next book you want to write, the next baseball match you want to win, if you're that way inclined.
Baseball match, just. Now, apologies for this comparison, but that was the moment that should have ended Donald Trump's career, at least with the Christians, when he stood up and pretended to be this devout Christian and said, "My favorite book of the Bible, Corinthians 2." But nothing was riding on that happily, and your reputation is intact. But don't you worry though that the juicy things in life that religious people are afraid to lose are, if not hard to capture by a piecemeal secularism, they're not captured in a way where we can just point them to the replacements. So this community that people have by virtue of gathering every Sunday to worship, the off-the-shelf rituals, when it comes time to get married or bury a loved one, they have language that is ready-made to do this. Doesn't it strike you as a problem that accounts for why we haven't just changed people's minds?
I don't think it occurs to you, really, does it?
No, it occurs to me in the sense that religious people continually advertise the inadequacy of a worldview that doesn't have these things. But actually, I've experienced the problem. If I imagine someone in my life dying suddenly, I would have more work to do to figure out how to honor that occasion.
Well, we do that, don't we? I've organized several funerals. You may have done.
I haven't, but still, you're reinventing civilization for yourself to some measure.
But if you think about funerals you've been to, I've been to many church funerals where there is also a eulogy or two eulogies, where there is perhaps music played by a string quartet, as I had for my father's funeral. And the bits that you feel moved by, the bits that you feel are worthy of the memory of the dead person, they're never the prayers, they're never the bits that the vicar intones, just the standard formula, the sort of ritualistic formula that he trots out for everybody. They're when somebody stands up who really knew the person and reminisces about the person and moves you perhaps to tears thinking about the person. The music, the favorite music of the dead person, the poetry the dead person loved. This is what's moving about funerals. And I've organized funerals for my father, for the great evolutionary biologist W.D. Hamilton. I organized his funeral in New College, Oxford Chapel. And I had about 4 different people talking about his achievements. I found that there had been an anthem composed for Darwin's funeral in Westminster Abbey, especially for the occasion, and I think it's never been played since, but I went to the British Museum Library, dug out the manuscript copy of this anthem, gave it to the choir master of New College, Oxford, and he rehearsed the choir. They sang this anthem that had never been sung since Darwin's funeral, for perhaps possibly Darwin's greatest 20th century successor. So I'm not really very impressed by people who say that religion gives you rituals that you can't replace. You can replace them, and you can replace the best parts of them and ignore the worst parts of them.
Thank you very much. The contemporary novelist Philip Kerr once wrote, "Atheism is like standing up to the mafia. There's safety in numbers. Tonight, I feel very safe." Now, that was a delightful introduction, but I'd just like to make a more complete introduction for those of you who don't know me. As far as I can tell, I'm Australia's only 6-foot, ex-Mormon, lesbian, comedian, atheist, and diabetic. Thank you. Although actually I feel the much more accurate labels are geek and nerd. And I should point out that the reason I'm drinking beer on stage is not out of disrespect for your good selves. It's a medical necessity. I did mention I was a diabetic. Well, when I was diagnosed, there was a big drama about how to keep my blood sugar levels level during performing. After much experimentation, turns out sipping a beer quietly through the show does the trick. Thank you. It comes with the added bonus of making my beer tax deductible. And I'm pretty sure that may be the holy grail of the Australian psyche. Because every time I've used that term on stage, men have gone, tax deductible. It's a beautiful thing, beautiful thing. Now, the title I gave this talk I'm doing tonight in the program is called 20 Years of Kicking God in the Shins. Although I should tell you the original version was 20 Years of Kicking God in the Nuts. But I decided maybe that was a bit too rude for the program, and it's probably very much affected by the fact I'm a big fan of South Park. Any other South Park fans in? See, basically, for more than 20 years, me and God, we've been doing the Rochambeau. I kick him in the nuts, then he kicks me in the nuts, then I kick him in the nuts. And I'm not sure, but I think Cartman may be God. Just quietly. He has the appropriate psychoticness. Because, you know, this God of the Old Testament, he's very fond of the "how much do you love me" games. And sometimes I can just hear Cartman going, "Do you love me? Do you love me enough to kill for me? Respect my authority! You go to hell and you die!" Tell ya, Cartman is God. Just a working theory. And also, up front, I'd just like to say, because I did a bit of mingling in the foyer during the canapes and drinks, and having gone to many Mormon conferences in my life, I'm here to tell you the level of attractiveness here, much higher. Although, to be frank, the bar wasn't very high. If you've ever met many Mormon men, you'll know why I'm a lesbian. So basically, I've been doing comedy for 20 years, and for 20 years I've been trying to kick God in the nuts pretty much. And it was almost inevitable that I would get a career as a comedian, in that, having grown up Mormon, born and bred Mormon, I was gifted with material. They gave me my first 20 minutes worth of material. My whole career grew out of telling stories to people at parties about the Mormon church and them going, "Oh my God, you've got to be kidding! Ah!" Let me just give you a quick run through of some of the weirder Mormon beliefs. God and Jesus are two actual physical beings who live on a planet called Kolob. It's way out past Pluto, and we can't see it because there's a force field around it. I would also like to point out that Kolob, spelled backwards, is bollock. Also, so, in between the crucifixion and the resurrection, Christ was not in heaven, he was not in hell. Where was he? He was in America. He spent those 3 days preaching to the Indians. Not only that, the Garden of Eden was in Jackson County, Missouri, according to the Mormon Church. They've actually bought up all the land there because that's where Christ is going to gather the faithful at the second coming. I also, because I was in the church for almost 19 years, I also did proxy baptisms for the dead. Because I don't know if you know, but if you're interested at all, you can't get into heaven until you've had a Mormon baptism, which is why they're doing all this genealogy. You know, you want to research your family history, you always end up bumping into Mormons because it's their plan to baptize everyone in the entire world. And I've done 100 of them. So I don't know if there's 100 happy souls in heaven because I got baptized for them and they're there, and then when I became a lesbian, they got thrown out. Sometimes late at night when I have Mormon flashbacks, I worry that they'll come for me. Not only that, I think the most ridiculous piece of Mormon theology, if Mormon men are very good and behave themselves very well, after they die, if they get to top Mormon heaven, because by the way, there's three, Americans, always bigger and better, not just one heaven, 3. If they get to top Mormon heaven, they can go on to further study and become gods themselves and have their own planet and their own creation. Which means there is a possibility that at some point way in the future, someone may get to heaven and find out that God is Donny Osmond. Or even scarier, one of my brothers. Because that'll be a creation of horsey bites and Chinese burns. Oh, they never stopped. So basically, you know, professionals have messed with my mind for a very long time. And not just Mormons, actually. I would like to bring your attention to something that I've been calling Operation Warp the Kiddies' Fragile Little Minds, which most of Western society, even if they're not Christian, help to conduct. Basically, what I'm talking about here is Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy, and God. We all let the kiddies grow up believing that they're all real. If he gave me more money, maybe I would. But isn't it interesting? There are 4 mythical beings, and basically the one that gives you nothing is the one that's real. Santa Claus gives you presents, the Easter Bunny gives you chocolate, Tooth Fairy gives you cash. I'm sorry, 3 of the best things that humans want. Cash, chocolate, and presents, cool. And what does God give you? Nothing. Guess what? He's the real one. Ha! Which means that at very early age, we are fucking with these kiddies' minds. We are telling them to discount evidence. We are telling them to ignore their senses. It's like, oh, there's evidence for these. No, don't just ignore that. It's God. He's the only one that's real, darling. I don't think so. So anyway, it has been a very odd career. I've done many weird and extraordinary gigs, and probably nothing more extraordinary than this, I think. I believe I am still the only comedian to have performed for the Sydney Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras and the World Council of Churches in the same week. I wasn't surprised by the invitation from Mardi Gras, but when the World Council of Churches rags, I was like, are you sure? Have you got the right comedian? Do you know what I talk about? Fair enough. And obviously I'm still really very scarred. Scarred by my Mormon upbringing, because, you know, you try and fight it, but there's always a little residual Mormon in the back of your brain that no matter how hard, you just can't quite kill it. And it has manifested in an obsession with a religion that I just can't quite let go of. You know, it's like tangling with the tar baby in the briar patch. You know, it has led me to do incredibly stupid things. I once auditioned for the part of Mary Magdalene. in Jesus Christ Superstar. I gave what I thought was a very realistic rendition of I Don't Know How to Love Him. What to do, how to please him, wouldn't have a clue. Have to ask a straight girl. And I don't know if anyone else noticed, this totally blew my mind. It was probably about 15 years ago now. There was a very tiny article about this big in The Age that said that the Church of England had officially abolished hell. They just got rid of it. And me, the thought of eternal damnation, torture and red-hot pokers up the arse wasn't playing too well with the punters. So they legislated it out of existence. I have questions. Many questions. Where did they go? They got rid of limbo, they got rid of purgatory. I assume it was a mass upgrade to heaven. Wouldn't that have been an interesting day to be in heaven? As all these people who've been tortured and red-hot pokers up the arse for hundreds of years are suddenly thrown into heaven going, what the fuck? I'll have you, St. Peter, I'll have you. Anyway, and I think it's really rude to change the rules of the game halfway through the game being played. I'm sorry. Very wrong. And the thing is, I was thinking about this, okay, so they've got rid of hell, they've got rid of limbo, they've got rid of purgatory. Most religions have got their head round that women are fully human and have a soul. It took a while. Some religions have even got their heads around the fact that gay and lesbians are, really actually sort of okay. Maybe in 50 years no one will bat an eyelid at gays, lesbians and gay priests and whatever. Maybe everyone will just be over it. And I find that interesting and a little confusing, because I don't know about you, I never pictured God as being on a learning curve. You'd pretty much think that an immortal, omnipotent, omniscient being would have sorted it out millennia ago, not suddenly turned around and go, oh, actually, you guys are all right, sorry about that. I'll get Mary in with a broom later to clean up the mess.
Please talk about the primacy of free speech for maintaining the standards of education and the openness of a society. Why in a contest between freedom of speech and religious sensitivity must free speech win? It's amazing that this really is not obvious to most people. I mean, it's amazing to hear freedom of religion and freedom of speech talked about in this society as though there had to be a balance struck between them, as though there were some use of speech that was itself an infringement upon someone else's freedom to practice their religion, which is obviously never the case. There's absolutely nothing I could say about religion right now that is so disparaging of the project that would cancel someone else's ability to practice their religion, right? So it's just, there is no trade-off between free speech and...
I totally agree. And I'm distressed at the disparagement of free speech which is creeping into universities both in Britain and America. I was in Berkeley in the 1960s, Berkeley, the home of the free speech movement, and it's immensely distressing to me that Berkeley today has disinvited people because of the fear that a speaker might hurt the feelings of some religious people on the campus. What a betrayal of everything that a religion should stand for. The people at Berkeley and in London, the London School of Economics and various other places, like I think Leicester University, Birmingham University, should hang their heads in shame for destroying the fundamental principle of what a university should stand for. University should stand for not just free speech, freedom of thought, the ability to be challenged, the ability to be exposed to views that you find distasteful, so you can evaluate them, not be protected from them.
Yeah.
Do you guys consider yourselves to be atheists or agnostics? I understand that might sound like a silly question, especially to those of you who have been non-believers for a while, but I've personally been struggling with pinning down a label for myself lately. I also do understand that in the end, the label that I pick doesn't really matter. We are all skeptics at the end of the day, and that's what really matters. Anyway, the reason that I've decided to make this my discussion for today is that in the video that I posted on Tuesday, so the day before yesterday, Sam Harris at one point has a conversation with a young man whom had asked him a question. The question was basically, why are you, Sam Harris, against the label atheist? As most of you already know, Sam Harris has never been a fan of the term. He believes that in the same way we do not need a label to describe people who do not like playing golf or do not believe in the benefits of meditation, in the same way, we do not need a term to describe people who do not believe in a sky daddy that watches over us. And I actually second him on that. Giving a label to non-believers, weirdly and to some extent provides some credence to theism. It makes it seem as if theists and atheists are coming from an equal position of logic and rationality, which isn't the case at all. But the young man that Sam Harris was having a conversation with put forward an interesting point. The reason we do not have a word to describe non-golfers is that golfers have never attempted to force the sport or its philosophy down our throats as a society. And politicians have never tried to pass legislation based purely on the history and philosophy of golfing. And that's an interesting point, isn't it, guys? Because if golfers attempted to do any of that, we would be forced to organize in opposition, and our movement would eventually and inevitably receive a label somewhere down the road. Now, the reason I asked whether you consider yourselves atheists or agnostics had to do with another point that Sam Harris made in a different convention. I believe I included that section on Tuesday's video as well. Anyway, during his speech this time round, Sam Harris pointed out that he isn't a big fan of the term agnostic either, because he's never come across a person that was agnostic about Zeus or the other thousands of gods that have existed throughout human history. And I don't know about you guys, but I found that point super interesting, especially because he goes on to insinuate that when people consider themselves agnostics when it comes to the God of Abraham specifically, it's basically a cop-out. Because after all, the God of Abraham and the God of mythology, like Greek mythology, Roman mythology, are backed up by the same amount of evidence, man, which is basically zero. I've never felt more targeted, man, because I have referred to myself as an agnostic all this while. And not because I'm afraid to completely let go of the Christian traditions that I was raised in. At least that's what I tell myself. But seriously, here's why I'm more confident calling myself an agnostic and not an atheist. Do I think the God of Abraham exists? He likely doesn't. And it's a strong likely doesn't exist, because I'm like a step away from being 100% sure that he doesn't. Now, how I get to this conclusion personally is pretty simple. From just reading the Bible, the Quran and the Hebrew Bible, it's quite obvious that the God described in these books is inconsistent at best and an evil, depraved, degenerate at worst. The inconsistencies across the books lead me to confidently believe that these books were simply written by creative men who were improvising as time went by in an effort to come up with something that would give their societies a sense of community or a moral code to operate by. This theory is even likelier to be the truth when you consider and remember that the same thing was happening across every single human society around the world. And what one society in Africa came up with was entirely different from what another society in Northern Europe came up with, man. Hell, even societies within the same continent and sometimes countries came up with entirely different mythologies. So yeah, that's why the inconsistencies make me believe that it's highly unlikely that the God of Abraham will be unique in any nature like all other gods conceived by all other societies across the world. He is a false one, likely. Now, on the off chance, and I'm talking about the 0.00001% probability that the God of Abraham actually does exist, and these holy books are right, he is worse than any villain character the human mind has ever conceived, man. I've yet to come across a villain fictional character that calls himself all-knowing and righteous, but in the same breath goes on to give a divine instruction that a certain community should be completely wiped out. It's people, cattle, insects, basically everything, man. And not to mention the countless injunctions for rape, murder, and even more genocide that are littered across these books, man. So, yeah, my point is that I highly doubt that the God of Abraham at any capacity has ever existed. Now, that said, if you asked me if I think the gods of the Greek or Roman mythology have ever existed, my answer should be, I don't think so. That would be the consistent answer. After all, we've already established that the evidence for both sets of God is non-existent. But that's not how I usually answer the few times I've been asked by children or friends whether I think the gods in the Greek mythology have ever existed. My answer is usually a strong and resounding, no, they've never existed. They were all made up by a society that was attempting to explain the weird natural phenomena around them. This means Sam Harris is actually right. I might be coping out in my subconscious when I call myself an agnostic. I actually really hope that my ramblings are making sense to you guys and I haven't lost any of you along the way. Now, all that said and done, here is the conclusion that I've personally come to, for myself at least. I do not think I have enough information to confidently declare that a God doesn't exist. And so calling myself an atheist wouldn't honestly feel right. And in this case, I'm not talking about an old, white, bearded man in the skies as he is usually described in the Abrahamic religions. I'm talking about every possible conception of a God that the human mind has ever conceived. So yeah, I'm still an agnostic when it comes to all possible beliefs and religions. You know, do you believe that God is just the laws of physics? Good for you, man, as long as you do not push that down our throats or demand that politicians pass legislation based on your belief. As long as you do not do that, that's okay, man. If you believe that we live in a simulation, in an alien computer, that sounds terrifyingly cool, and while I highly doubt it's the case, I cannot 100% deny its validity. Yeah, you know. So, ladies and gentlemen, back to you in the studio. What do you think about the two labels, atheists versus agnostics? And which of the two best describes you, man, and what's your rationality behind your decision? And again, at the end of the day, I know that the label doesn't really matter as long as we are all willing to stand against the malevolent effects of the Abrahamic and all other religions. So, yeah, it's just a fun thought exercise. Yo, thanks a lot, guys, and I'll see you again the day after tomorrow with a new one. Thanks, man, and stay safe. Peace.